Alcatraz. You know the name, right? It's iconic. But let me tell you, the real story, it's way more interesting than any of the legends you've heard. We're going to peel back all those Hollywood myths and really get to the truth of what this place was all about.
So, in this explainer, we're going to walk through the entire incredible journey of Alcatraz. I mean, how does a lonely, desolate rock in the middle of a bay become the most infamous prison on Earth? And what's its story today? That's what we're diving into. And really, that's the big question, isn't it? How did this 22-acre piece of rock become the world's most notorious prison? Because you see, Alcatraz wasn't just another jail. It was a statement. It was meant to be a one-way ticket for the baddest of the bad. So how did it get that reputation? How did it become this ultimate symbol of punishment?
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at how it went from a fortress to a prison. Then, we'll get into what life was really like on the rock. After that, we've got to talk about the legends, the incorrigible inmates. Then, of course, the famous escape attempts. And finally, we'll wrap up with its occupation and what its legacy is today. Okay, let's jump right in. Section 1, from fortress to prison. Because here's the thing you might not know. Long before any gangsters set foot on that island, Alcatraz had a totally different job.
So, check out this timeline. The whole story really kicks off way back in 1847. The U.S. military basically called dibs on it. Fast forward to the Civil War, and boom, it's a military prison. But the place we all think of, that maximum security federal pen, that didn't happen until 1934.
And this right here really shows you what Alcatraz was all about at first. For almost 75 years, its job wasn't to keep people in. It was to keep threats out. Think about it. It was a military fortress loaded with cannons, basically the bouncer for San Francisco Bay.
All right, now let's imagine we're stepping inside those walls. Welcome to Section 2, Life on the Rock. And when it became a federal prison, Alcatraz was designed with one single purpose in mind. Absolute, and I mean soul-crushing control.
Okay, so life inside was all about the rules. I mean, everything was a rule. Your day was just a rigid routine of bells and bars. You had to shave 3 times a week, no exceptions. Every single piece of mail, in or out, was read by a censor. And get this, after every meal, guards counted every single fork, every spoon, terrified that one might go missing and get turned into a weapon. They even named the main corridors things like Broadway. Can you imagine the cruel irony for guys who knew they'd never see a real street again? And behind all that, there was a darker truth, too. Racial segregation was just standard practice for assigning cells.
And if you want to understand just how suffocating the surveillance was, look at this. Alcatraz had the lowest prisoner-to-guard ratio of any prison in America, and they counted the prisoners 13 times a day. Think about that. There was literally no escaping the eyes of the guards. It wasn't just a prison. It was like a human warehouse, built for total 24/7 observation.
And what happened if you broke the rules? Well, the punishment was brutal. Take it from inmate Henri Young. He actually testified in court about his time in the hole. That's what they called solitary confinement. He described this place of just total darkness, cold concrete, designed for one thing, to completely break your spirit. His testimony really pulled back the curtain on the kind of intense psychological torture these guys were up against.
So, all of this brings us to Section 3, the incorrigible inmates. You see, Alcatraz wasn't for your average criminal. Oh no, this was the end of the line. It was built for the guys that other prisons just couldn't handle. And a few of them, well, they became absolute legends.
Let's start with inmate number 85. You might know him as Alphonse Capone, Scarface, public enemy number 1. But here's the crazy part. He wasn't sent to the Rock for murder or for running a criminal empire. Nope. He was sent there for tax evasion. The government's whole plan was just to make him disappear, to make him totally irrelevant. And Alcatraz? It was the perfect black hole to throw him into.
But the real irony here is that while the prison held him captive, something else was destroying him from the inside out. Capone was suffering from neurosyphilis, and it was ravaging his mind. By the end of his time there, this guy who once ran Chicago was a shell of his former self, literally playing the banjo in the prison shower. So Alcatraz didn't just lock Capone away, it basically watched his mind completely unravel.
And then you have this guy, Robert Stroud. You know him as the Birdman of Alcatraz. On one hand, he was a genius, a self-taught ornithologist who literally wrote the book, 2 of them actually, on bird diseases. On the other hand, he was a diagnosed psychopath who had murdered a guard in cold blood, a real walking contradiction.
But here's where we have to do a little myth busting. The Birdman of Alcatraz never actually had any birds at Alcatraz, not a single one. All that amazing research he did, that happened at Leavenworth Penitentiary before he was transferred. Once he got to the Rock, he was just another inmate, stripped of his famous feathered friends.
Okay, this all leads us perfectly into our fourth and probably most famous chapter, the escape attempts. I mean, the whole point of Alcatraz was that it was escape-proof, but that never stopped inmates from trying to do the unthinkable.
And the most legendary attempt of all went down in June 1962. It was masterminded by Frank Morris and two brothers, John and Clarence Anglin. And their plan was just brilliant. For months, they patiently chiseled away at the concrete walls of their cells, using sharpened spoons and a homemade drill they rigged up from a vacuum cleaner motor.
Can you believe that?
And look at this. This is my favorite part. To buy themselves precious time, they made these dummy heads out of papier-mâché and get this, real human hair they swiped from the prison barbershop. They'd stick these in their beds at night, and the guards doing the rounds were completely fooled. Absolutely incredible.
So, the million-dollar question, did they make it? Well, the FBI's official story is that they drowned in those freezing, treacherous currents, but there's some pretty compelling evidence that suggests otherwise. A makeshift raft and footprints turned up on nearby Angel Island, a car was reported stolen by 3 men that very night, and here's the clincher, the U.S. Marshals still have the case file open. To this day, nobody knows for sure.
And that brings us to our final section, occupation and legacy. That great escape, in a way, marked the beginning of the end for the prison. Its time was running out, but the island story? Oh, that was about to start a whole new chapter.
So just a year after that famous escape, in 1963, Alcatraz shut its doors for good. Why? Honestly, it was just too expensive. The place was falling apart and cost about 3 times as much to run as a normal prison. But the island wasn't empty for long. A few years later, it became this powerful symbol for a whole new reason when Native American activists occupied it from 1969 to 71. And today, it's a national park, a museum that tells all these stories.
And you know what's wild? Its fascination is stronger now than ever before. This place that was literally designed to make people disappear is now a top tourist attraction. We're talking 1.5 million people every year, all lining up to get a peek into its dark, complicated past.
And that brings us to a really interesting question about the future. Believe it or not, there have been actual proposals to reopen Alcatraz as a modern supermax prison. So it really makes you think, is Alcatraz a piece of history that we should just preserve and learn from? Or is that powerful symbol of being the ultimate inescapable prison something we should actually use again? I'm curious, what do you think its future should be?